It's now working.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hello, hi
How
Joa.
are you?
Good to see you. How are you? How was
I'm
everything?
I'm doing okay. I think just because there's a lot going on, I'm doing as okay as I can with everything that's like going on here at the moment.
Oh my gosh, it's been crazy. I've had to log off social media for a while because I can't stand just scrolling through and seeing everything. I'm tired of it. I'm frustrated. I'm honestly, I'm scared for myself. I'm scared for my dad because he's a male and he's African American. So I'm really tired of all of it.
Does the protests and the riots take place also in Houston in Texas?
Yeah, they've been. It's honestly it's scary because they are kind of violent. But I don't live in the city. I live outside of the city in a small suburb, so we haven't really had many protests. We had a couple in the city, which were awesome. I know one of my friends actually organized them, and the police actually blocked off part of the roadways where we would actually walk with the sign. It was really nice. Honestly, I think it's all beautiful to see. I think this is something that's never happened before. See a lot of my friends who normally don't talk about issues like this because they are kind of uncomfortable to talk about, and to see them actively speak out about these type of issues, it really warms my heart to see.
But what's particularly scary for me is that the same people that I see getting like killed and then their videos being shown on TV and then pictures being shown of them, it's like that could have been my dad, that could have been my uncle, that could have been my cousin. And it's almost like living in a dystopia. Like it's like living in a Hunger Games type world where like literally we're questioning people's worth based on what color their skin is. Like just sitting there and thinking for a moment, we judge people at face value because of how much melanin is or is not in their skin. Like that's not something anyone controls. You're just born into this world as whatever you are.
If we think about the response to the protests today, which, are by and large like a lot of curfews across the country in different cities, the president saying that he's considering, sending in the military to like squash insurrection, right? Like those things haven't been done in this country for about 50 years. The last time there were like nationwide curfews like this was in 1968 after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. A lot of people are saying like the only thing that could bring up something like this, it's also because of just, like years obviously of oppression, but it's also like the coronavirus has left a lot of people without jobs, so they have more time to protest, but also like they're frustrated at the government's lack of response towards like helping poor people in particular, especially as like a lot of the media has focused on some of the wealthiest people in America growing even more wealthy during the coronavirus pandemic. I have read a few things that say that they go hand in hand, and I wouldn't be surprised if they are.
Who would have ever imagined that this would erupt exactly at that
I
time?
know.
It's so crazy. And that's why I was wondering, like, why is this death, why was this the thing, like what was this the reason for this eruption? Because like, this was the spark. Why not the other ones?
This was the tipping point. It was truly the end. I think all of these protests and riots really just weren't for George Floyd, but I definitely think it was like a building point from Breonna Taylor, all the other deaths that happened, many more that some people don't even know about, because I think most people just know about George Floyd. But I think it was definitely a building point, and this just kind of set it all on fire, because there's this quote, I don't know if you heard it from Will Smith. It says that racism isn't getting worse, but it's getting filmed. So I think whenever the video erupted on social media, that stirred everyone crazy. It's sad to see someone kneeling on your neck for an entire 8 minutes. It's not like a shooting and it happens in just 8 seconds.
I think the reason why George Floyd specifically has made this into such a movement is that not that he was just an unarmed Black man that was killed unjustly by the police. Usually what police officers would say is like, oh, I was so scared and I threatened for my life. Or they were resisting arrest, like someone was trying to not be in handcuffs. But you can clearly see he's not resisting. He's unarmed, like you don't see anything on him, and he's on the floor, defenseless. And this police officer is on his neck. And I think what's so eerie about it is that at a certain time, I think you see him get comfortable with the fact that he's killing someone. Like he puts his hand in his pocket. On the other side of the video, there's a firewoman who's screaming and saying like, check his pulse. Everyone sees that he is screaming and kind of, you can see his labored breathing. And then all of a sudden he's not moving any longer. And I think that's when everyone's like, check his pulse, check his pulse. Like, please, like see that you're killing him. And then to see the video from the other side of the street, the fact that you can't realize in the first video that there are 3 cops on him. You only see the one on his neck. And you wonder why he's saying my back hurts and my stomach hurts, to know that it's because there were 2 other cops, one on his back and one on his stomach. it's like, I don't understand.
It's not just the coronavirus, but it's like in these last few months, there have been multiple deaths that have been relatively like well spread on social media. I mean, it wasn't just George Floyd. We had Ahmaud Arbery like the week before that even. And then Breonna Taylor a few months before that. And then who's become even more relevant or like more time. Like we've seen, at least in the United States and the spheres that I'm in, I don't know if this has reached Poland, but it's like people are consistently sharing like many people who have died even within 2020.
Do you think the President Trump is handling the situation with enough of severity, or do you think there's a lack of good leadership in that moment?
There's definitely a lack of good leadership. Like I said, he's one of the first presidents in American history that has not unified American people. Said, if you loot, we shoot. Like he was going to bring out the entire U.S. military, start shooting the protesters and leaders rather than addressing the nation and solving the problem. So it is definitely a lack of leadership.
Not even just this, but the coronavirus pandemic was like, I feel like the first show where it's like the president is in a serious crisis, like a very big one, and he's not taking it that seriously at all. Like this is probably the biggest crisis the country has faced since, I don't know, like I wouldn't even call 9/11 that big of a crisis if we're being honest. Like it's the biggest crisis I can remember in a long time. The pandemic, he just did so bad, so bad. There was a lack of a national response, which obviously there's a question of whether a national response is really possible given the way our government works. But there was no attempt at a national response. He was consistently he surrounded himself with, doctors who knew what they were doing, and he was consistently disagreeing with them. As a person who knows nothing about, medicine, it's just so bad. And I mean, now it's even worse, right? Because so first during the coronavirus, I mean, it's just hypocrisy, during the coronavirus pandemic, he was like, we need to let the states do whatever they feel is right. And now he's like, fuck what the states want. We're going to send in the military, whether they agree or not. The image of America abroad has just been tainted so badly, right?
This movement isn't anything that's like new. Like Black Lives Matter is not anything new. I think I started hearing about it in 2012, maybe when I was 11. And these unarmed Black men and women have been being killed for a while now. And usually what happens is like there's a hashtag where people try and get justice. You see it posted a lot of times on Twitter, and then we kind of move on. For me, I don't think I've ever been able to move on.
Some media are saying, and honestly, I don't know, again, how true is that, but people are saying from the opposite side that, yes, those events happen, but there's also a lot of white Americans being arrested without a reason by the police or being attacked by the police. Is it just in general that the police is brutal, or is it direct at people of color?
That's a good question. Of course, there are good cops and bad cops. And I think they're prejudiced towards both races in a way, but it's more towards African Americans. If it is towards white Americans, it's a small percentage of them.
A lot of people will bring up statistics and say like, oh, but more unarmed white people were killed than unarmed Black and Latino people. But one thing that you need to consider is that the U.S. is made of 76% white people. The U.S. is then made of 13% Black people. So I think last year, 19 unarmed white men were killed and 9 unarmed Black men were killed. And those are only the documented ones that we know about, because we all know too well that like the government can handle things in whatever way they want to. They can hide things if they would like to. 76% and only 19 people were killed, but 13%, 9 people were killed. Then you will have people saying things like, oh yeah, but like Black people are involved in like more violent crime. And it's like, okay, that very well may be true, but what are the circumstances that make people commit crimes? Also, the way that we look at different crimes in different ways. Crimes of property, to me, are not violent crimes. Someone running into a grocery store and robbing them, that's not something for me that I look at as that big of a deal. Do I feel bad for whatever grocery store that they stole from? Yes. But a lot of times it's these chain stores that have millions of dollars anyway. But when it comes to crimes against people, that strikes me a lot, because someone dying when they shouldn't have to, someone, God forbid, getting like assaulted or anything in that realm, I don't think any of those should be happening. But the fact that people will put crimes against people and crimes against property on the same level and act like they're the same thing, I think shows us how much I think that we've allowed like capitalism and all these things to seep so much into our systems that literally you see someone robbed and that person is so much a criminal, the same way that like a serial killer is or something. With the Black American experience, it's like you bought all these people 400 years ago from their places in Africa, and you put them in various islands across the Caribbean and different European countries and the United States, and then you strip them of all their rights. They can't earn their own money. They're discriminated against because of the color of their skin. It's kind of like, what else do you expect then? At a certain point, those people are going to get fed up.
See, racism is like a scale. You know, there's the extreme of racism where there's violence and oppression, but then there's also a version where it's the word used or the looks we get or the feelings we have because we know we don't belong in the environment. For me, I actually feel like sometimes I'm not Black enough and sometimes I can be too Black for my environment. And that's really, really hard because no matter how much education I have, no matter where I go to school, I'm always going to be perceived as a certain way. I'm always going to be perceived based off of the clothes I wear, based off of how I talk. I mean, even though the way I talk is articulate, some people view that as being too white. Or if I wear a certain brand of shoe or clothing, like I'm acting not Black. It makes no sense. Or if I walk into a store, I'm constantly followed because they think I'm going to shoplift or I'm a part of this ghetto crew. And that's not true. So I think a lot of what racism is the words that we use and just the prejudices that we have.
I don't see the same thing that white people have to go through, because it's like I was speaking to my family the other day. They're allowed to be complex. You're allowed to see a white person who, God forbid, is a drug addict or a robber, but then they're also allowed to be a billionaire or a lawyer. And people don't focus on the drug addict or the robber. They will focus on the good side. Whereas sometimes I feel being a minority, whether we're talking about being Black or being Latinx or being Asian, they probably have a certain stereotype for you. For Asians, it's called the model minority myth, which says that like, oh, they're supposed to be the ones good at math, they're good at science, they're good at technology. Then for the Latinx community, you might have a whole bunch of things. They are all Mexican, they're all undocumented. Not all undocumented people are Mexican, and obviously not all Mexicans are undocumented. A lot of them are here in this country, documented. Or you might hear that they're very like feisty or something, very fiery. Those are all stereotypes you hear about Latinos. And then for Black people, you might hear things like, oh, they're lazy, they all live in poverty, or they all live lives of crime. And just knowing that those are taken into account when someone can first meet you, it's a lot to deal with, because then you feel like you're always having to work against this stereotype.
It boils my skin because some of my friends who I go to school with who have made racist comments or comments that have been uncomfortable, they're reposting stuff like about Black Lives Matter. And yeah, I think for some people, it is just a trend. It is because it's popular. It's just going to be a one-time thing. You know, even though these protests and social media posts are a great thing to see, they're not going to bring about change. I mean, yeah, they're just going to stay on our profiles. And I understand the importance of coming together, but really like the looting and stuff, it's not changing anything. What really needs to change are like different ways to put about platforms, educating individuals on these issues. That is how we're going to bring about change.
Because people right now say that they demand the system, the society to change. What would be the first kind of demand, and what would be the change that they actually expect right now?
I think the easiest thing to do is they don't need to hire certain police officers. There needs to be some sort of training within their system, because if that police officer had a prejudice towards African American individuals, he should have never been hired on staff. First, before there needs to be some sort of change in the legislation, I think the easiest thing to do now is to go back in our police facilities and make sure we're hiring the right officers.
The number one way we see that when, Black people are murdered by the police for reasons that are, that for no good reason. And that's kind of like the ones that we get most angry about, because, you can't bring someone back when they're dead. And the police is like the everyday arm of the United States judicial system. They do the day-to-day enforcement of the law. They're the people who kind of have discretion, what we call discretion, in terms of choosing who they're going to charge, like who they're stopping on the road, how much force they use individually. If we think of racism, which I think we can all agree with is something that at least has to do a little bit with individuality, then, the police, who are undoubtedly, at least some of them racist, are part of the problem, right? In the way that they choose who they're going to stop, and also in the way they choose how much force they're going to use with each person.
What do you think is the best way for people from outside the US to bring about some sort of help or support to the Black Lives Matter movement right now?
A lot of people view kind of like the big protests and the social media movements that often bring about the most change, but I think to me, it's the little things we do at a time that end up making the big things more important, if that makes sense. So doing those little things now, like spending an extra hour to get on a Zoom call with a friend or reaching out to someone, that's going to save maybe a death later on.
I think reading is a good thing to do always, learning more about it, because I think, like I said, the specific things we see are just kind of the surface, like in fact, the worst of it, right? Where it's like the murder of Black people by the police, is relatively uncommon. And when we see it, it's because it's in our faces. But it's like, that isn't for the most part the everyday racism that exists in this country, or the everyday like police kind of brutality, and just like that stuff can be solved if you think about it. Like the idea of police murder, we can't hold police accountable for those things in a way that is realistic, I think. And if the only problem with the justice system in the United States as it relates to Black people is that, but thinking of it that way does erase all the other stuff that goes behind it, right? It's like, it's not just the police target Black people and kill them at disproportionate rates. It's like that they are policing Black communities disproportionately in a way that harms their economic potential. And what that means is that Black communities, therefore, because we know that poorer communities are more likely to commit crime, they're going to perpetuate that system. So it goes over and over and over. So when people ask to defund the police, they're asking for the first step of like dramatically changing our justice system so that it doesn't disadvantage Black people in a way that continues to set them behind, and also continues to have them be charged at ridiculous rates for crimes that they often don't commit, or they don't commit at higher rates than other people, and then go to jail for so long. It's just really unfair. I think, yeah.
Where do you hope this particular time, where do you hope those events into what it will develop? What do you hope to see kind of grow from those events?
I think what I would like to see happen from it, and I think it's already happening, is that it's like gaining traction all over the world. And I think particularly with social media, it allows us to communicate with our friends and people that we know all across the world. Just knowing those little actions that we take, or like emailing the mayor, we're seeing all this stuff happening. People like to say like, oh, these protests, riots, and looting, it's not going to get you anywhere. But we've seen it getting us somewhere. All these people across the world now know and like now see us. People are not going to forget about this. Seeing that something has gone as far as Syria and Australia and Germany, all these places, you can have one place forget about something, but you can't have the world forget about something. So that's exactly what I've wanted to see happen all these years with all these cases, and that's exactly what is happening.